Okay, so in the last one, we saw how the 3-level paper was not very clear and specific about, well, any of this really for that matter. It wasn't clear about the topic of inquiry. It didn't situate it within the relevant scholarly works very well. It did have them in there, but it doesn't really clarify what the topic exactly is. The connections between them weren't very clear. But going back to the 5 now, it was very clear. The topic was very clearly explained through each of the relevant scholarly sources. One seemed to connect to the next and seemed to tell the story about this particular research that's been done. And it clearly addresses a gap that's been done. Now, the next thing we want to look at is, so if this is the gap that we're looking at here, do we have an instrument, a way, a methodology to study this that is detailed? And the thing is that you need to defend the alignment of your method. So if this is what you want to prove up here, in other words, then talk to me about or explain to people about every single step that you took in designing the study so that they fully understand that this is going to ultimately give us good data on what you want to find out. Okay, so let's take a look at the 5 really quickly. So on this 5, you'll see as you read through it that every single decision is clearly explained in detail, and not just explained but justified. And that seems to be really, really important for scoring the highest level here. So all the little details here. So I'm just going to read little bits here and there. But it says the interview questions, and I'm up here. The interview questions which serve to validate that the food samples being collected by the Mexican-American households were representative of their daily, weekly diets were created with reference to the questions that had been posed by other researchers exploring the subject of micronutrient deficiency in ethnic populations in the past. The questions asked of the study's participants were structured in the format of a 24-hour dietary recall method, which has been affirmed by researchers in the field of nutrition as a useful resource in estimating average nutrient intake according to the Australian Child and Adolescent Obesity Research Network. The recall required that participants name all of the foods that they had either prepared or consumed in the last 24 hours. The interview then extended to questions regarding the weekly diet as seen in Appendix 1. So this student is telling me that he or she has really done their research into not only this topic, but what is the best way to do research on this topic. Is showing me that, hey, I learned how to do studies correctly by looking at other successful and validated studies. Moving on. You get more details here about the design and implementation of everything. Now, this person's study was in 2 parts. Part of it was having them log their diets, and another part of it was actually done in a laboratory, and it was testing the iron content of the foods that these people were eating. And so that, I'm not going to read this, but it does give you a lot of procedural details in here. It's easy to kind of get lost in this if you're not, somebody who knows tons and tons about science and labs and so forth. But if you read this, you can appreciate that this student really, really learned all the terminology and has become kind of a semi-expert in this particular area. Obviously, he or she had a lot of help. Another thing that helps this one to become a 5, by the way, and I'm going to skip back up to the scoring guide here. If you go down to the bottom, one of the things that makes the difference between the 4s and the 5s is this element right here. This is one of the few differences between a 4 and a 5. So on a 5, It uses design elements, conventions of grammar, style mechanics, and word precision to organize and enhance the communication of the student's ideas with few to no errors. The 4s competently communicate the student's ideas. There may be some errors. So it's the difference between design elements and the control of this academic voice, the objective voice in the writing. And so if you look at this piece, and obviously if you read it, it reads very well, this student does a really good job with these elements here, putting in charts, turning them into tables. I believe the student created his own tables and charts, graphs, etc. Each one of them is handled in the manner that is characteristic of the discipline of science here. And so this helped to push this one up to the 5 level. When we look at a 4, actually I can take you over to this 4 really quickly. This is Time for Dinner, comparing similarities in the family-oriented marketing of meal delivery kits and TV dinners. This one has some images in here. Let's get to those. All right, we have one here. Notice there's just a little bit of less detail, like where is what this thing is. It's just not there right now. It doesn't tell us table, where this comes from or whatever. Down here we're going to get some pictures of ads, but it's just a photograph, and it doesn't really give us any kind. There's no schematic, or there's no arrows. There's nothing here that really helps us to understand why we're looking at this picture of the advertisement. It's not bad. It's just not done quite as well as the other paper, and that's what made the difference. Okay, so let's go back and look at the methods section for the 3. What you'll find here is that the person sort of describes the design of the survey that he or she put out there, will tell us what's on it, but doesn't really explain why this is the best method, doesn't explain why the questions were put, and so forth. So I'm going to read just some of this here. This person says, using Google Documents, a 3-part survey was created to gauge the participants' participation of public transportation. The first segment was simply used to determine the participants' background and views. The inquiry selected required those 18 and over who lived or work in the metropolitan Atlanta area. It was also important to get responses from counties that, while within the bounds of Metro Atlanta, do not yet have functioning MARTA systems to service their citizens. The first segment of the survey contains questions to elicit the race, age group, gender, and political stance of the survey participant. There was also a question requesting which county the participant lived within, along with a drop-down selection which contained all of the Metro Atlanta counties for the participant to select from. The next segment, and so on and so forth. And so what's not being explained here is why is this data necessary to collect. The person said it was also important to get, but never explains why that actually was important to get. And so because this is just sort of a description of the process, but never really justifies the process as why this data, could we have done it differently, anything, then this one only scores a 3. Now, one thing that's crucial for anything above a 2 is that the study itself, and this is really key, be replicable. It has to be a replicable research method. If it's something that you do that only you could have done, that it's so unique that nobody else could do that, it's impossible to take and reproduce this survey or whatever, then it just cannot score above. It will be stuck down here in the 2 land. So this one is replicable, but it's got questionable alignment to the purpose of the inquiry. So I want you to really take a close look at how you're describing your methodology and make sure that you're really getting in there and giving all of the details that you need to make that clear, make your rationale very clear to the reader.